All right. Good evening. I've got time for us to begin tonight. Good to see each of you. We are beginning a new study tonight. On the screen in front of you, Portrait of God, Viewing God Through His Redemptive Work. I intended to be passing this out as you were coming in, and then I got busy talking and forgot to do it. So I've got something here for you. It is a bookmark, and as we go through the class, you'll understand a little bit more about it. But those who will be up here on the table may take a moment to pass those out before we leave our class tonight. This is, I told Regina a little while ago, this is kind of a combination of, go ahead to the next slide, the book that Frank Chesser wrote a number of years ago entitled Portrait of God is kind of what this class is based on. That's one of the books it's based on. There's another book that it's based on I'll talk about in a moment. But years and years ago, he started teaching just the overall theme of the Bible in a Bible class. He's taught it numerous times, and then he ended up writing the book. Similar to something that Franklin Camp did many years ago. There's a series of, they were cassette tapes, then they were put on CDs. Redemption Through the Bible, where he started in Genesis, went all the way through the Bible. That was his intention. He didn't make it all the way through. He passed away before he finished. And Bobby Duncan, who preached at the 6th Avenue congregation in Jasper, also the Adamsville congregation, finished that class for him. And so those CDs, Redemption Through the Bible, Brother Camp, the majority of it, then Bobby did the rest of the New Testament. Similar idea, and I'll make that point as we go through tonight. The other book that this study is based upon is this one. And this is really the book that it's based on. What I want us to do, and I don't know how far we will get in this during this 13-week quarter. We will either go into it the next quarter, or we will come back to it a different quarter. I'm not exactly sure how we will be doing that, but it will take more than one quarter to do this. It is my intention for this not to take years and years and years, but this is a 20-chapter or 21-chapter book, the book that you're looking at on the screen, and I intend to divide it up that way. After a class tonight, you're going to say, all right, if you cover that many chapters tonight, you won't live long enough. But we're not going to do it that way, and I'll explain that as we go through. The bookmark that I was holding a minute ago, this is a copy of it. Actually, Matt Wallen, who works with House to House, Heart to Heart, is the one who made this, put it together. On the front side, that's the part on the left. If you're looking up here, it's on the left. This is the outline, overview of the Bible. Starts in Genesis, ends in Revelation. And it's 20 or 21 different sections with a theme. It's somewhat chronological, also topical. The backside of it is 3 parts. One encourages you to read through this bookmark at least once a week, refreshing your memory so that you remember the various parts of the Bible. So if somebody mentions, for example, Ezra, well, you know immediately. It's Old Testament history, it fits in, and you can see the place where it fits. You know what came before it, you know what came after it. In the middle of the back of the bookmark is a QR code that will take you to a site where you can listen to Brother Chesser preach. It's one sermon where he goes through the entirety of the book and the class. So he summarizes it all into one summary. Does everybody know how to use a QR code? If you don't know how to use a QR code, find a child and hand them your phone. If you have a smartphone that's connected to the internets, but you just put your camera on it. You don't take a picture of it. You put your camera on it. It's going to pull up the address. It will take you to the site, and you can listen to Brother Chester preach the sermon. Let me warn you before you start listening to Brother Chester preach this sermon. Buckle up, because he goes fast. I mean, two minutes into the lesson, and he had already covered a half an hour's worth of material. So I say that somewhat facetiously, but really he does go through it rather quickly, because it's an overview. He wanted to get it all in one lesson. And then the bottom part of the bookmark is a QR card that will take you to Apologetics Press website, the store, where you can actually buy a copy of the book, Portrait of God. If you don't have it, and we'd like to have it, you can buy it there. You can also buy it like 21st Century Christian. Other bookstores like that will sell it. The first time I looked for it, I looked online for a used copy. And I found a used copy. I've got it right here, just so you understand. It's a used copy of a paperback book, and it was $65. I didn't buy it. That's when I found it at 21st Century Christian. And then I realized Apologetics Press had it also. I think it's like $12.95. And it's worthwhile, especially if you want to read that as we are studying. And I'm sure that would be helpful as well. So I've got this bookmark. I don't know. I did 45 of them. I don't know if that's enough. Roger, how many people are in here right now? I'm estimating 87. I don't know if that's right or not. That's a preacher count, Ruby said. Yeah. All right. But anyway, that's kind of an idea of where we're going in the class. Now, one other thing about this, and I know you probably may not be able to read this. If you're at the back, that's okay. I also have this material on a sheet of paper. Very simple. These are the divisions that we'll be looking at. So tonight we're looking at Genesis chapters 1 and 2. All right? You notice the heading is not there. Now, so I'm going to give you this, and here's what you're trying to do. And here's what I'm hoping we're able to do. By the time we finish, you will be able to take that sheet of paper and write in Genesis 1:2. Oh, I know what the heading of that is. I know what that passage is about. And you can write in, this is the world before sin. That's what we're looking at tonight. And you can go down through every part of the Bible and say, I know what those books or those chapters are about. And because you read something like this on a regular basis, you've gone through the study, you've perhaps listened to the sermon Brother Chester preaches, you've read the book, you're able to look at the Bible and say, I know what that part of the Bible's about, and I know how it fits into the whole of God's book. Because it's really easy to say, I know that Jeremiah is an Old Testament book, and he's a prophet, but I really don't know what that's about. Or I know that, the book of Galatians is in the New Testament, but I'm not really sure it's easy because how many books in the Bible? 66. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but do you know the name of every book in the Bible? Without singing the song, can you say the names of the books of the Bible? Or if somebody says Psalms, do you know which book came before that? Or which book came after that? This type of study can be helpful to give you that foundation so that you know enough about the Bible that when you began talking about or looking at sections of it, you know where it fits and how it works into God's overall plan. All right, so I've got that piece of paper up here as well. You've got the headings on the bookmark, so, it won't be any problem. If you want to write those in, you can do that. What I would suggest is you take that and use it to test yourself. All right? We're 3 months into a study like this. We've covered however much. Can I say those? Do I remember those? All right. So let's begin. Genesis 1 and 2. If I were to say, what's Genesis chapters 1 and 2 about, what would you say? Creation. Creation. I think that's probably the most given answer to that question. And that would be right, would it not? It's about creation. Genesis 6, about a man who built a boat. His name was Noah. Genesis 6, 7, and 8 is about Noah and the ark, is it not? Most of the book of Genesis is written about one particular man. Do you know what his name was? Abraham, and you'd be wrong. Because it was Joseph. Yeah, more of the book of Genesis is about Joseph than it is about Abraham. Joseph was in what place for the most of that? Egypt. All right. Now, these stories are not just about creation or about Noah and the ark or about Joseph in Egypt. If you dig down into these biblical stories, this is what they're about. I should point this way because you're looking up here. This is what they're about. They're about redemption. And so when we study Genesis 1 and 2, we're not just looking at God made the stars and God made the planets and God made the animals and God made man. All that's true. But there's a deeper meaning in those chapters than God made the animals and God made the planets. The same with the ark. It's not just about a boat full of animals. It's not just that Joseph was in prison and Joseph had a dream. All of those tie together to the one theme that runs throughout the Bible. I asked the question earlier, how many books in the Bible? 66. How many different authors? Approximately, because we don't know exactly. Around 40. How long did it take to write the Bible? All right, around 1,600 years. Obviously, it starts at the beginning. Moses was writing many years after that, but around 1,500 to 1,600 years that it took to produce the Bible. And yet it has one theme. And that one theme, if you wanted to sum it up in one word, is the word redemption. But it's the plan of God to redeem sinful man and reconcile him to himself. That's what the Bible is about, from its beginning to its end. And so if I'm reading the Bible and I don't in some way see the message of redemption, then I'm missing something. A lot of times we talk about 66 books, 1,500 plus years, 40 different authors. How many different languages? Two, actually three. There are two major languages, Greek and Hebrew. I should say Hebrew and Greek, because Hebrew is the Old Testament, Greek's the New, but also Aramaic. Parts of the Old Testament, very few parts of the New Testament are in Aramaic. Three different languages. A lot of times when we emphasize those things, we point out this fact. With it having one theme, and all of those things being true, how likely is it that the Bible is a work of human origin? You have a theme that is consistent from beginning to end. over that long period of time with all those different writers. What if you took 40 different sports writers, since we're right here in the middle of the championship college football, and 40 different sports writers are writing about the 4 teams and the 3 games that are played, started Monday night, will be finished next Monday night, and they're writing about those events. Do you think there would be any contradiction between them? No, not at all, Gene says. No, he said very sarcastically. There would be. What if you had 40 historical writers writing about a period of time in American history? You think they would all agree on everything? Not at all. And yet the Bible has that agreement and has that consistency. And so that emphasizes to us that there is one message in the Bible, and that's the message of God saving mankind. And so when we look at Bible stories, and there's nothing, I don't want to leave the impression that we shouldn't teach our kids Bible stories. They need to hear that. They need those basic facts so that later when they come back at an older age, they know that part, and they're able then to fit in the deeper meaning of pertaining to salvation, pertaining to how we live so as to please God. And so as we look at that, I hope that's what we will be seeing. Let's move, all right, to the next thing. How do we divide the Bible? What are some ways we divide it? How about this one? 3 dispensations. The patriarchal dispensation basically is what book? Genesis. The Mosaic period covers basically what books? Exodus through Malachi, exactly. And then the Christian dispensation. That's the New Testament. What about this one? Do we divide it that way? Old and New? How many books in the Old Testament? 39. How many in the New? 27. That adds up 66. That's exactly right. All right, but what about this way? What if we divide the Bible this way? Can you divide it that way? Before sin and after sin? Now, every way in which we've seen already is important to understand. I mean, we need to understand the difference between the patriarchal, the Mosaic, the Christian dispensation. We need to understand the difference between the Old and the New Testament, because there is a difference between them. But it's also important that we understand the difference between the part of the Bible that's before sin and after sin. Now, this division is very lopsided, isn't it? Because when did sin enter? Genesis chapter 3. So you have 2 chapters before, and then after chapter 3, the rest of the Bible is during that period of time where sin has entered the world. But for our study tonight especially, that's what we're going to be doing, that's what we'll be looking at. Let me suggest 2 sections in Genesis 1 and 2 in the world before sin. This is the heading for the first part. Well, before I get there, let's notice something about God's creation. Romans 1 and verse 20, where Paul is discussing the Gentile world and the sinfulness of the Gentile world, he points out that even the Gentiles are without excuse, because God's character, his invisible attributes, the part of God that makes him God, is clearly perceived. And he identifies them as his eternal power and his divine nature. The King James says his Godhead are clearly seen by those things that he has made. So, when you look at the creation, is there something about the creation that argues for the existence of God? Sure is. There are a number of things. Any of you watch Kyle Butt's debate last month, or maybe in November, when he debated the skeptic, the atheist on the campus at Faulkner. I watched some of it. I haven't had time to watch all of it. But Kyle made some arguments based on creation. Creation calls for a creator. Design calls for a designer. And those type of arguments. So when you look at the creation, the Apostle Paul writes by inspiration that says, you're without excuse if you do not recognize from that the existence of God and something about His character. Look at Psalm 19, verses 1 to 3. The first few verses of that psalm, the psalmist says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament, what does the firmament show? His handiwork. He goes on to say that day after day pours out speech, night to night reveals knowledge. There's no speech, there's no language where their voice is not heard. It doesn't matter what language you speak, it doesn't matter where you are. The creation glorifies God, the creation declares that He is. Now, nature reveals something about God, but it's limited, is it not? By looking at nature, what do you know about God? Think about it this way. Those who, without divine revelation, without the Bible, and they've looked at things like storms or hurricanes or those type of events, what do they conclude about the gods? Yes, they're angry. We have to appease them. Is that true? When there's a storm, does that mean God is mad? Not necessarily. So, nature tells us there is a God, but we don't know anything about His character simply by looking at the sun, the stars, the trees, the created things. We are able to search nature and draw conclusions about God. But the Spirit of God searched the mind of God, and as a result of that, we have the written revelation of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 points out that we don't know the mind of God. And his illustration, we don't know the mind of each other unless we tell each other what we're thinking. In the same way, we don't know the mind of God, but the Spirit searched the mind of God and revealed through inspired men like Paul what God wants us to know. And that passage tells us, when we're studying from the book of 2 Peter on Sunday morning a few weeks ago, I pointed out that 2 Peter chapter 1 verses 20 and 21 is one of the important verses about the inspiration of the Bible. This is another one where Paul makes it clear that God has revealed His will and His mind to us through words. And those words are what are written in what we call the Bible. He was speaking about the things he would write, the things other inspired writers of his day would write, but the principle pertains to what Moses wrote down through what John wrote from the beginning to the end. And so with the written revelation of God, we can understand God, we can understand His will, and we can understand what He wants for us. All right, so let's look at Genesis 1 and 2. First of all, God and perfection. If you want some words to help you remember the world before sin, Genesis 1 is God and perfection. What does Genesis 1 verse 1 say? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. All right? What does Genesis 1 verse 31 say? If you've got it there, you can read it. That's very close. It was very good. God surveyed the entirety of his creation and said, it is very good. At the end of every day of creation, God said it is good. But after the sixth day, he said it is very good. And then, what did he do on the seventh day? He rested. All right, now, just a point here. Genesis 1 and 2 describe a creation, particularly chapter 1, describe a creation that occurred in 6 24-hour days. In each of those days, evening and morning was the first day. Evening and morning was the second day. He does that all the way through that first chapter. Let me give you some things that will help you if somebody says, no, I don't believe that. You have people who say, you know, I believe in God, and I believe he created everything, but to create everything like it is, he used the process of evolution. And really it took millions of years. And I mean, after all, you see the record in the rocks and, you know, all those different things that scientists say, and they're really smart, and so you know that they're right. And so, you know, I can believe in God and at the same time believe in evolution. And so it really, Genesis 1 is more a mythical summary of those things. It's not really telling you that it happened in 6 literal days. Well, actually, it is telling you that. And this idea that it took millions of years for God to create the world simply doesn't square with what he said in his book about what he did. One of those in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 11. Let's turn over there and look at what, this is what God is giving the 10 Commandments. In verse 8 is where it starts with the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And then God explains, 6 days you work, but on the seventh is the Sabbath to the Lord. You don't work in that day. Verse 11 tells you the reason why. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Now what were they being told they had to do? Remember the Sabbath day, and you don't work. For how long were they not to work? It was a 24-hour day, was it not? Well, why not? Because God created the world in 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh day. So you work for 6 days, and you rest on the seventh day. He's using the words exactly the same in what he is expecting of them and what he himself had done. In Mark chapter 10, in verse number 6, this is when Jesus is answering a critic. And they had raised the question about divorce. He had given an answer. They said, well, what about this? And so he says, verse 5, it's because it hardens your heart. But listen to what he says in verse number 6. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man leaves his father and mother, is joined to his wife. He talks about what happens. But did you see where Jesus put the creation or the beginning of the human race? What does evolution say about the beginning of the human race? Wasn't it millions and millions of years after life began? You had that one-celled organism, and then it becomes something else, and then over that millions of years, finally humans appear on the earth. What does Jesus say? From the beginning of the creation, he made them male and female. Evolution says it's millions of years. What does Genesis say? How long after the beginning of creation was man and woman created? 6 days. That's pretty close to the beginning, isn't it? So from the beginning, Jesus says, not millions of years, and that squares with 6 literal 24-hour days. And then in Psalm 33 and verse number 6, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. You remember what Genesis 1 says? And God said, let there be light. And God said, and something is created. It comes into existence because God spoke it into existence. The psalmist says it was by the breath of his mouth. Now here's a question. Is God able to speak things into existence? Is God able to speak things into existence? If what we read there is true, he did. But I'm saying, just set Genesis 1 aside for a moment. Does the God that you read about in the Bible have the power and the ability to speak things into existence? Yes. Did he say he did that in Genesis chapter 1? Yes. Does he corroborate that in passages like Exodus 20, Mark 10, Psalm 33? Yes. Why then would we not accept what the book says? That God spoke into existence those things over a period of 6 days. Calvin?
Mm-hmm. So my faith, I believe these characters and things, but I come up with my own faith. They don't have deep faith.
And that's a good point. And I think that's exactly the problem that you have. People are wanting to believe in God, hold on to that, but at the same time accept the secular view and somehow be able to juggle both of those. And you know what the scientists say, the evolutionary scientists say about people who believe that God used evolution to create everything. He said they're crazy. They can't be right. You're trying to straddle a great gulf that you can't reach across. You either believe one or the other, but you can't accept both of them. And I think that's a real good point. And if we get to it tonight, that idea of faith, I think, will be evident that that's exactly the case. Anything else before we go any further? I don't mean, and I don't want to use in this class the whole time. I want y'all to participate as well. But if you don't, I'll keep talking. Tom?
Just the very fact that our faith should be in line with the faith, the precious faith that we have in Christ, his Father. That keeps us on course from bearing off, from going from a statement to a question mark.
Mm-hmm.
If we believe that God did this, did that, then we're going to believe everything that he did.
And you can turn that the other way too, can't you? Yeah. If you doubt what is said about him in one part of the Bible, then you take out the foundation of trust throughout the rest of it.
There was a commercial on television a year or so ago. I think it was Mercedes-Benz. They were advertising the facts about that car, and they said either it is true or it is not. They would give the fact about the car, and they said either it is true or it is not. Well, the same way with our faith in God, either it is true or it is not.
Mm-hmm. I'm surprised they're able to put commercials like that on TV anymore. Yeah, because that sounds awfully narrow-minded. All right. This is where I want us to give some emphasis in these first two chapters. Yes, it reveals the creation. It talks about the order of creation. A lot of our kids can sing you a song. Day one, God made light when there was none, and you can go all the way through all 7 days. The creation and God resting. They can sing and tell you what was made on each day, and there's reason to study about that, but it's not about those things. It's about the Creator who created those things, because the Bible is about God. And when we look at these Bible stories, when we look at these passages with the emphasis on Him, it's going to open up a great deal more. In the first chapter, for example, 31 verses. How many times is the name of God used in those 31 verses? Any guesses? 10? 31? That's real close. It's 32. 32 times in 31 verses. Tells you this is probably about Him, isn't it? In fact, when was the book of Genesis written? I'm not asking for a specific year, but who was the author? Moses. And so he obviously wrote it prior to the children of Israel entering the land of Canaan, right? How do we know that? Because he died before they entered. And so this book, along with the 4 that follow it, also written by Moses, were written and given to the children of Israel as they prepare to enter the land of Canaan, possibly even while they're still wandering in the wilderness. When God sent him down to Egypt, you remember what Moses' question was? When I get down there and they ask me who sent me, who am I supposed to tell? And what did God say? I am that I am. These books are an introduction to I am that I am. As they read Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, they learn something about the God who sent Moses to bring them out of Egypt. They learn something about the God whom they are serving. And so the Bible is about God. And what was true of them is true of us as well. As we read this book, we learn something about the God that we're serving. We see His divine sovereignty in chapter 1. We see His supreme power. We see His infinite knowledge. We think about this universe and how complex it is, beyond our understanding. And how did it come into existence? God spoke it into existence. We see also His wisdom, His grace, His love. I mentioned earlier the 7 or 6 days of creation, the order of creation. If you go back and look at Genesis 1, you'll see that there were things created. For example, light was created day 1. Where does our light come from? And I'm not talking about these lights. If you're outside during the daytime, where's your light come from? The sun. When did God create the sun? Day 4. There was light before the light giver. How was that? That's easy. That's the easy answer, isn't it? God did it. God created the light before He created the sun. The same with the land on which the animals were created. The same with ultimately on day 6, which was the whole purpose. He created man on that earth. And so there's an order there, and there's also, you see God's wisdom, His grace toward us, His love toward us as He created those things. So as the Bible unfolds, we see the nature of God. So as you leave Genesis, move into the rest of the Old Testament, into the New Testament, you see things about God and His promises. Think about His promise to Abraham. Think about His promise to Noah. Promise that God made to Noah. We still are the beneficiaries of that. God destroyed the world that He created with a flood. But when Noah came off the ark, God promised, I will never do that again. When was the last time you saw a rainbow? God put that rainbow there after the flood to remind. Who did He put that to remind? himself. When I see the rainbow, I will remember my promise. We learn something about the promises or the nature of God through his promises, through prophecy. As you come through the Old Testament, the prophecies that are given. You learn something about the providence of God, or God through the providence that is expressed to his people. I mentioned Joseph earlier. Look at how God cared for Joseph. But in caring for Joseph, he did something else. As the promise that was made to Abraham remains viable, because he spared the descendants of Jacob, the Israelites, through what he did with Joseph in Egypt. So you learn something of his nature and providence in his blessings and also in his judgments. As he judged nations, including his own people, we learn something of his character. But ultimately, we learn about the character of God in the person of Jesus Christ. In John 14, as he's talking to the apostles, and they are concerned, they're upset because he said he's leaving them. And in the midst of that, Philip says, "Show us the Father, and it will be enough." And how did Jesus respond? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. In fact, he started, "Have I been with you this long and you haven't seen me?" In all of these things, it is the nature and the character of God that we are learning about as we learn about these events and these passages in God's Word. All right, so that's the first part. God and perfection. That's his creation. That's chapter 1. Now, when you get to chapter 2, it's almost like it's a different creation story. It's not a different creation story. It takes one small segment out of chapter 1, day 6, where God created man, and it gives you more detail about that creation and about how God created man and the purpose for which God created man. You remember verses 26 and 27 of chapter 1, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." All right, so we won't have time to go through all this, but we'll start tonight. Because Genesis 2 focuses on day 6, we noted these things already in chapter 1. After each day, he said it is good. But those first 5 days prepare the scene for day 6. Now, I asked a question earlier, could God speak things into existence like he said he did? And obviously he can, because he did it. Let me ask this question. Could he have created everything at the same time? Sure, he could have. So there's a reason that he didn't. And there's a reason he did it the way he did it. And it is, I think, evident in Genesis 1 and 2 that God is making the point that out of everything that he created, the thing that is most important to him is mankind. And everything else is prepared or created so that man can be created. So that we have the sun, the moon, the stars, and the benefits of that. So that we have the land and the seas and the benefit that comes from that. So that we have the plants and the animals and the benefit that comes from that. But God created all of those things so that he could put man there, because it is man that is created for a relationship with God. And so those first 5 days set the stage, as it were, for day 6, and then that's explained further in Genesis chapter 2. I mentioned the verse, and we'll pick up right here next week and go further. Let me say this. You can go read those verses on your own. But there are 4 principles that we'll look at next week that come together in this chapter. And that's grace, law, love, and obedience. All right? Grace, law, love, obedience. And then we'll add a fifth one to that. And Calvin, this is what I was talking about earlier, that pull them all together, and that is faith. All right, so that's where we're going next week. If we finish it in time, we'll start the next section. But don't forget you've got these bookmarks, this paper up here. If you want those, feel free to come get those at any time.
Uh-oh. That's the last one.
I don't need that. I'm not ready to guard.
You don't really think about it. You have something to take with you. That's what you do.
If you'll take a songbook and turn to number 32. Number 32 will be our invitation song this evening. Just a few announcements before we get to the invitation. I have a number of people on our sick list tonight. Carolyn Henson is still sick at home. She is some better, but she's not able to be out. I did not get an update on Mitzi. Is she still at home sick? Mitzi Dunaway still at home sick. Also remember Nell Childers. She was out Sunday with sickness. Lincoln Terry has not been doing well. In fact, hospice came in this week to help with them and will be taking care of him over the next few weeks. So be sure and keep Lincoln in your prayers. Remember, Lila Ray will undergo eye surgery in the morning at Women and Children's. John Holly is scheduled to undergo surgery on the 8th at Crestwood. Keep both of them in your prayers as those surgeries are upcoming. Leanne's father, Malcolm Jones, has finished his radiation. We're thankful for that. They're going to be assessing that, determining unless they've done that already, but they're going to be assessing to see what they need to do in the future. David Mooneyham still unable to be out with us. I know he had a knee replacement schedule that they postponed. Tommy, do you have any update on that? Okay, all right. We mentioned Sunday, Jolene's father, Clyde Yarborough, suffered a fall and asked that we keep him in our prayers. And Corey Henson, who is at Project Rescue right now, was diagnosed today with COVID. So keep Corey in your prayers as he deals with that. Any others we need to add to the sick list or update, Robert? All right. Keep Jolene Suttles in your prayers following a fall. Anybody else? Things coming up right after we conclude tonight. Jeff needs your help, if you can, to put together the house-to-house, heart-to-heart for mailing. This particular house-to-house is one in addition to the ones that we normally do. There was a survey taken, and I'm not sure who did the survey or any of the particulars, but the question was asked about New Year's resolutions, and one of them was one that was given quite often, was something along the line of get back in church or start going to church or something like that. And so this particular issue of house to house is focused toward that, to try to encourage people who are thinking that way to go ahead and act upon that. So your neighbors are going to be getting that in the mail sometime probably this week. Keep that in mind and take advantage of that to encourage people who are in need of coming and in need of studying the Bible to do so. Also coming up, remember Sunday night is our song and prayer service. The theme, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's Sunday night at 6. And then next Sunday, that's January the 14th, ladies, remember the baby shower in honor of Carly Suttles from 2 to 4 in the annex. And the announcement says, Think Blue. If we have anything else that we need to announce, we'll do that at the close. But right now, again, the invitation song number 32, The Great Physician. And, you know, this time of the year when there's so much sickness, and you heard the list that I gave, and there are others that are in our bulletin that I did not mention, but that would, desire being remembered in our prayers, and people have things they have to deal with. When it comes to a far more important or serious matter, certainly not in any way discounting physical sickness, but spiritual sickness is far, far more dangerous, and if not dealt with, spiritually fatal. It's caused by sin, unlike the sicknesses we have that range from the common cold to very serious matters. Spiritual sickness has one cause, and it's sin. And it has one way of dealing with it, one way of it being cured, if you want to use that terminology, and that's the blood of Jesus Christ. The thing that separates us from God, that causes the spiritual problem, can be forgiven only through the blood of the Lamb, the blood of Christ Jesus. As we sing this song about Him, about the great physician, if you find that you are in need of that healing, of that forgiveness, this song is giving you that opportunity, encouraging you to take advantage of it. If tonight you need to be restored to your first love, if you need to be obedient to the gospel, take advantage of this opportunity. Don't let sin keep you out of heaven. It will if you don't take care of it. Jesus died so that you could, and so that you could be in heaven with God through eternity. If you need to respond, do it right now. While together we stand while we sing.
The great physician now is near, the sympathizing Jesus. He speaks the drooping heart to cheer. Oh, hear the voice of Jesus. Sweetest note in Sarah's song, sweetest name on mortal tongue, sweetest carol ever sung, Jesus, blessed Jesus. His name dispels my guilt and fear, no other name but Jesus. Oh, how my soul delights to hear the charming name of Jesus. Sweetest note in Sarah's song, sweetest name on mortal tongue, sweetest carol ever sung, Jesus, blessed Jesus. And when to that bright world above we rise to see our Jesus, we'll sing around the throne of love, His name, the name of Jesus. Sweetest note in Sarah's song, sweetest name on mortal tongue, sweetest carol ever sung, Jesus, blessed Jesus.
One name that I have written down here that I've overlooked, Carlton Fowler. Keep Carlton in your prayers. He was actually sick some this week. He is improved, but be sure and keep him in your prayers as he continues to make improvements, as he continues to get stronger following his stroke and his surgery. Yes, sir. Go right ahead. Thank you, Sam. Wyatt has our closing prayer.
Let us pray. Dear God, I thank you for this day, Lord. I thank you for letting us come out here tonight and learn more about you, Lord. Just please be with us as we go throughout this week and let us take what we have learned and apply it to our life so we can be the shining lights in this world. Just be with us as we go throughout this week. Bring us back at the next